The train had long since gone, coughing smoke and sorrow into the fading blue. Its echo haunted the tracks like a memory, not quite present, not quite gone. And there she sat still, on a splintered wooden crate, no more than a ghost wrapped in worn calico and stubborn silence. She did not speak, not to the conductor who had glanced back with a question in his eyes, not to the boy who sold apples and offered her the last bruised one free of charge, not even to the wind, though it tousled her loose strands of hair like it knew her name. She had arrived 3 days ago. Each morning since, she'd dusted off her skirts, smoothed the creases from the letter clutched in her palm, and waited, not with hope that had evaporated somewhere between the last station and this godforsaken end of the line, but with something quieter, something like dignity that townsfolk had noticed. How could they not? A mail-order bride who never got picked up is like blood on snow, hard to ignore, harder to look at for too long. Children stared from behind fence posts, women whispered behind aprons, and men, well, they turned their eyes away altogether. She sat like a question no one wanted to answer. In her lap, a faded carpet bag rested. Inside, 2 hand-sewn pillowcases, a hairbrush, with half its bristles, a wedding dress wrapped in brown paper, and a brooch, tarnished but sacred, pinned by her mother's hands. The day she left she touched none of it now. The bag remained shut. The dress remained folded. Only the letter moved, crinkled, again and again between her fingers like prayer beads. A shopkeeper's wife approached her once. Day 2, with dry biscuits in a basket, and a voice like brittle parchment. "Honey, maybe come rest in the shade. Ain't no one worth melting over." She smiled softly, more with her eyes than her mouth, took the biscuit, ate it slowly, but she did not rise. Not even then. The sun ruled this town high and merciless, and by evening it had drawn lines of salt beneath her arms, across her brow, down her spine. She did not fan herself. She did not complain. Only once, when the wind picked up a corner of the letter, did she speak. A whisper, barely louder than a breath. "Not today," and tucked the paper back into her pocket like a secret too precious for strangers. That night, she slept sitting up right there on the crate. The station master offered her the bench inside. She declined with a nod and a polite, practiced smile. It wasn't pride. It was something else, something worn but woven deep in her bones. On the 4th morning, the crate grew hotter, sooner. Flies circled her ankles. The boy with the apples returned, this time with a cup of water wrapped in a cloth to keep it cool. He didn't ask her anything, just set it beside her and left. She nodded, and something in the boy's chest cracked open just a little, like the start of a storm you couldn't see yet, but felt in your ribs. That afternoon, the truth arrived, not in a letter, not in a man, but in the sideways glance of 2 women leaving the mercantile, whispering like leaves in dry grass. He never meant it. Just a joke to him. No, wrote 3 girls, same letter, bragged bout it over poker. That girl still sittin'. Lord help her heart. The words were quiet, but not quiet enough. Her head didn't turn, her shoulders didn't move, only her hands. They slowly folded the letter, not angrily, just. Finally, she rose from the crate. Her skirt caught the wind, billowing slightly, like sails remembering the sea, and she walked past the station, past the gaze of every person who ever thought themselves more fortunate, because they were never left waiting. She walked until the town gave way to brush, until her boots grew heavy with dust, until silence reigned, not in pity, but in peace there, beneath a leaning juniper tree. She knelt, dug a shallow patch with her bare hands, and laid the letter inside. She didn't cry, she didn't curse, she didn't look back, just placed a flat stone atop the spot and whispered, "Now, you rest too." By sundown, she had returned to the crate, sat back down as if she'd never left. But something in her was different. No longer waiting, still tired, yes, but no longer hoping for rescue. Now she was simply enduring. From the ridge above town, a man watched. He did not know her name, but he had seen her 3 days in a row. Seen her stillness, her refusal to crumble, her silence. He had buried someone once, to a wife who never made it to his ranch, carried the linens, lost the dream. He knew the look in the girl's eyes. Not lost, just emptied. He did not ride down, not yet. But that night, he left something behind, a shawl, thick and warm, placed gently on the crate after she fell asleep. She never woke as he set it there, but when the morning came, she pulled it around her shoulders and said nothing. And so the days turned. Like pages of a slow book, she remained unnamed, uncased, but not unseen, and in the quiet corners of town, a different story began to hum, soft and low, not of a bride, forgotten, but of a woman becoming something else entirely. The sky turned softer that week, less cruel in its color. The blue grew paler, the sun blinked behind thin clouds, and still she sat in the same place, though her eyes no longer searched the horizon. She had stopped waiting, but she had not left, and in that act alone, she unsettled people. The town was too small for mysteries. Whispers filled the space where names should have been. She must be touched, poor girl. Wrote some man she'd never met and got left like a stray pup. I'd never admit it, but she's braver than I'd be. Even the good-hearted folk like the widow who sold pies near the well looked at her with a sorrow reserved for broken things, not for women still breathing. No. One asked her story. They thought they knew it, but stories like hers don't unravel all at once. They reveal themselves in silences, in the gentle tilt of a chin, in the way someone wraps a shawl tighter around herself when the wind grows cold. It was the 5th morning when the truth showed its face, not to her, but near her. 2 men outside the saloon leaned against a post, speaking loud enough for the whole world to hear. Yeah, that girl May Lorder thing. Jonas wrote her, and 2 others, bet on M, said, whoever showed up first, he'd wed less he found someone better first. The name stung. Jonas. Even those who heard it winced. One man spat, tobacco. Fools. Up in Nolan now. Married a merchant's girl. You seen her? Wears lace, and never lifts a finger. And just like that, the myth unraveled. He was real. He had lived, and he had forgotten her, without ever learning. Her name, she did not rise when she heard it. She did not flinch. But later that day, she walked to the edge of town with a loaf of bread tucked under her arm and fire in her spine. In that same quiet hour, from the slope just past the churchyard, another man watched her pass. He had been watching for days, never from shadow. He wasn't ashamed, but not openly either. He watched the way a man watches the river rise during spring's low, thoughtful, understanding it could flood or save, depending on the season. He was not young. His eyes had seen things and learned not to blink too fast. He spoke rarely. When he did, people leaned in. Not because his voice was soft, but because it never came without reason. His land sat just outside town, a stretch of sagebrush, broken fences, and a house half built by hands that had once hoped for a family. That never arrived. They said he lost his wife in a carriage wreck before she could reach him. No funeral, just silence, and he kept living. Quietly, he never remarried, never went to church socials. He was simply there. The only man in town who didn't look at the abandoned bride like a burden or tragedy. He looked at her like someone who understood how it felt to be stood up by fate itself. That afternoon, the girl visited the general store, not for supplies. Not really. She walked slowly, steady, inside. The owner's daughter offered her fabric blue muslin, a little faded. She shook her head. Instead, she bought nails, a small tin cup, and a bar of soap. She handed over the last 2 coins she had. The storekeeper tried to return one. She shook her head again. Pride, even now, still rode quietly beside her. Later, at dusk, a stable hand named Eli sat beside the rancher on a bale of hay, old, lean, and too tired to keep secrets. Eli looked toward the horizon and said, "She's still out there, still still breathin', still holding herself upright." The rancher didn't answer. Eli tapped his pipe against his boot heel. "She ain't waitin' no more. But she ain't moving on either. She's in that in-between place, the one you were in years ago." Still, no answer, just a pause. And then, at last, "She's not broken." It wasn't a question. It was the truth, spoken slow and sure. Eli smiled, just barely. "No, not broken. Just bruised in the soul." That night, when she returned to the crate, something new was waiting on it. Not food, not charity. A small horse, shoe-polished clean, tied with a string of faded blue ribbon. She stared at it a long time, didn't touch. It didn't throw it away. But she placed it gently beside her in the dirt and folded her hands in her lap. The next morning, the wind howled. A storm coming, the kind that smelled like wild thunder and soaked dreams. The townsfolk retreated. Doors shut early, but she remained outside, not on the crate now, but beside it. Kneeling, she built a small shelter of sorts, canvas, torn from her dress hem. 2 branches found near the edge of the well. No one helped her, but someone watched. Just before dusk, the storm rolled in. Lightning cracked like the heavens were splitting open. She did not cry, but her lips trembled. She sat in the shelter. She made barely more than a lean-to, huddled and silent. That's when he approached for the first time. Footsteps muffled by. The rain hat low. A coat draped over his arm. He did not speak. He knelt and extended the coat, heavy, wool-lined, the kind meant for the high country. She didn't look up, but her hands reached, took it, held it. "No, thank you, no." Name. Only shared breath in the storm, and then he left. Just like that, quietly. The townspeople watched from behind shutters, and none of them knew what to make of it. But they knew a story was starting, one with no words yet, just a man who gave warmth without strings, and a woman who, for the first time in days, closed her eyes while holding something that hadn't been stolen, lost, or promised in vain. And though no one heard it, not even the wind, that night, for the first time since she arrived, she whispered aloud, "Maybe I'm not forgotten, after all." The storm passed like a sorrow that had finally been spoken loud, trembling, but necessary. The earth was softer now, the air smelled of pine and second chances, and the girl who once sat on a crate no longer waited. She had begun to move, not far, not fast, like the first steps of someone relearning how to walk after falling hard. But she moved. The bakery took her in first. The widow who ran it had watched her day after day, admired how she didn't cry when the sun blistered her skin, or when the whispers thickened around her name like dust, so she offered her a job. No questions asked, just dough, flour, and a warm hearth. And so each morning, long before town stirred, the girl rose, tied her hair in a knot, rolled up her sleeves, and began again. Her hands, once meant for letters and linens, now smelled of yeast and ashdot, and it suited her. There was something holy about kneading bread, the way it required silence, strength, and patience. No applause, no witnesses, only creation, quiet and whole. The crate at the station remained empty. She never sat there again, but the shawl he'd once left. She wore it each morning as she swept the bakery floor. The horseshoe tied with blue ribbon. It hung beside the door, catching the morning sun like a silent promise. And still, he watched, not from a distance now. He came into town, never with purpose, never too near. Sometimes for nails, sometimes for feed, but always, his eyes would find her, soft and brief, like sunlight, brushing across a windowsill. He did not flirt, he did not stare, he simply looked, and saw, and that alone was enough to stir something inside her that had long been buried under years of being almost chosen. Nearly enough, just barely worthy. One morning, as frost curled across the windows, she stepped outside the bakery and found him waiting. Not close, but not far. He held a small apple in his hand, red, slightly bruised. He held it out, and for the first time she approached him. She didn't speak, neither did he. She took the apple, bit into it slowly. Juice ran down her thumb. He watched, not like a man admiring beauty, but like one witnessing healing. And then, he said the first words he'd ever offered her, their shade up past the ridge. "You're welcome to see it." He didn't explain, didn't ask, just left the words hanging between them, like a coat on a nail, useful. If one needed warmth, she looked at him, really looked, and nodded. That Sunday, she followed the trail that led beyond the church, past the dried creek bed to the place he'd spoken of. It wasn't grand, just a flat stretch of land with one tall tree, leaves gold with season's end. But it was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills your chest with something you didn't know you were missing. He waited there, sitting on a rock. No fire, no picnic, just presence. She sat beside him, not too near, not far either. They didn't speak for a long time. Birds moved through the branches, the sun lowered, wind pressed gently against her dress. Finally, she said, "He was just a name in a letter." It didn't sound bitter, just tired. He nodded. "So was mine," he said. And then she knew. He had once waited too. They talked little that day, but they shared her story, spoken not in anger, but surrender. Letters sent, dreams stitched in two. Linen, her mother's hands shaking as she pinned the brooch before the train. His story, gruff and simple, a wife lost en route. No body, no grave. Just a telegram, and the scent of grief he couldn't wash from his coat for weeks. She didn't cry, neither did he. But they left that place, different, as if the ghosts inside them had finally bowed their heads and stepped back. Days passed. They met often now, never arranged, just found each other by the well, under the shade outside the bakery at dusk. They spoke little. They never touched, but in the space between them, something tender grew, like moss on stone, soft and patient. She began sewing again, not the wedding dress that remained folded, untouched, but smaller things, curtains, a tea cloth, a blue shirt with wooden buttons. Sometimes she left them outside the bakery with his name stitched inside. Though she never asked if he wore them, he did always. One afternoon, she passed his ranch, not to visit, just walking. The house was old, weathered, but strong. A porch had been added recently, planks still pale with newness. A window had lace curtains now. She paused, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. It reached her eyes that evening. The town buzzed, louder than usual. A woman pointed. "They ain't married, you know." Another clucked her tongue. "Livin' like that? No shame." She heard them, but instead of shrinking, she turned, met their eyes, and said, "I've had a wedding dress folded for months, but I'd rather wear peace than promises." He didn't propose. She didn't expect him to. But one morning, she found him on her porch, with a single sentence that mattered more than any vow. "You belong here." She didn't answer with words, just stepped forward, took his hand, and walked inside. By spring, she had planted tomatoes. He had built a room on the house's east side, a place with light and warmth. There was no title for what they were, but there was trust. And where trust blooms, love often follows quietly, reverently, like a prayer finally answered, not by thunder, but by a steady hand reaching across the quiet. The world had shifted, though few noticed it. The girl who once arrived, wrapped in disappointment, now moved through town with quiet steadiness. She no longer looked for anyone. She no longer listened for the sound of trains. The shawl she wore was faded now, washed soft by sun and storms, but still warm. Still his dot. She had a place, not grand, not named after her, but hers, nonetheless. A porch where her sewing rocked on the breeze. A windowsill where herbs leaned toward the sun. A man who rose early, left coffee brewing, and mended fences with hands that had grown used to building again. Then, one afternoon, the past came back, not with fanfare, but in muddy boots and liquor-slowed breath. She was carrying eggs from the neighbors, her apron streaked with flour. When she saw the rider at the edge of town, he dismounted with swagger and weariness, a man not proud but hollow. Dust clung to his clothes like old regret. People watched from corners, hushed. He walked toward the general store with the kind of confidence that didn't come from courage, but forgetfulness. He didn't recognize her at first. How could he? She wasn't the girl in the letter anymore. She wasn't the one who sat on a crate with cracked lips and waiting eyes. She was the woman who'd let the letter go and stitched peace in its place. He bought tobacco, boasted, laughed too loud, claimed he once had 3 women write him in 1 week. Could have married any one of them if he'd wanted. Said it like it was some prize, some proof of charm. The rancher heard it first. He stood outside the smithy, cloth in hand, sweat on his brow, still as a tree in windless air. He watched, and then he walked. No rush, no rage, just walked, until he stood beside the man from the letter. The man who had written promises like jokes. The man who had been a shadow cast across a chapter long closed. They locked eyes, one pair steady, the other blinking in slow confusion. "You him?" the drunk asked, half a sneer curling on his lip. "The fella that picked up what I left." The rancher didn't answer. Didn't need to. He just said, slow and low, "You left nothing." She became something. And then he turned. Walked away. No fists. No fury. Only a truth left behind. Like a stone on an unmarked grave. The other man watched him go. A flicker of shame lighting in his face. Not enough to undo, but enough to remember. Later that night, back on the porch, she asked, "Did you see him?" He nodded. Leaned against the railing. The stars above blinked slowly, as if eavesdropping. She sat beside him, hands curled around a cup of tea, and then with a whisper like breeze through pine, she asked, "Do you think people ever forget us?" He looked at her, truly looked, and answered in a voice that came from deep within his chest. "Only the ones who never saw us to begin with." She placed her hand on his, not soft, not tentative, certain, and the years ahead opened in that small gesture. Not a vow, not a ring, just the choice made again and again to stay. The next morning, she walked into town with something clutched in her hands, the letter worn, folded 100 times. The edges curled like dry petals. She knelt at the hearth in the bakery, the place that had first given her warmth, without asking who she was, and fed it to the flames. It caught slowly, then burned. Ash drifted upward, caught in sunlight, then vanished. She didn't speak of it again. Didn't need to. The letter was never her story. It had only been the lie that carried her to the truth. Spring came slow and kind that year. He built her a bench beneath the cottonwood. She planted marigolds beside the porch, and one morning, she found a cradle carved from oak sitting quietly near the window. No explanation, no announcement, just waiting. Like love does. They never married, not in the way folks expected. But the town stopped whispering, because sometimes what's visible can't be denied. The way he watched her laugh at the neighbor's cow, the way she touched his arm when no one was looking, the way their home felt, and on the day she held his hand, older now, slower. While watching their grandchild chase dust in the yard, she said something the wind carried off before he could fully hear. "I was never abandoned. I just hadn't arrived yet. Now maybe, dear heart, you've felt forgotten too. Maybe someone left you at the edge of your own story. Maybe you waited, and no one came. But hear this, and let it sink deep. Love doesn't always ride in on time. Sometimes, it walks slow. Sometimes, It's already there, waiting for you to notice it sitting quietly by the shade. The truest kind of love won't rescue you. It'll recognize you, and that is how destinies change.